It's family. All right. Good evening, everybody. Today is March the 2nd, 2021. And the Board of Education is blessed that you would join us this evening. We know you have a lot of stuff to do in your family. And in this time of COVID, we know you have a lot of things to worry about, and to put us on your plate as an important function of your day is a real honor to us. And we appreciate you being here today. We have a pretty extensive agenda. It's not like our normal business meetings. We have two committees meeting today. A committee we call governance, and our chair will hopefully describe what that committee does very briefly. We also have another committee called policy that is meeting today, and that chair hopefully will describe, as most of my colleagues do, what their business is about when they convene their meetings. I will be leaving at about 6 o'clock or so, and our very able and competent and capable, committed Vice President, Cynthia Elliott, will chair the balance of the meeting when we close it out. I'll say what I always say to you all: be safe and have a good evening. But without further ado, let's begin our meeting. Madam Clerk, we usually begin with the speakers. My understanding and speaking to staff is that there are no speakers today. Is that right?
That is correct.
All right. Madam Clerk, would you mind telling the folks out there that happen to be listening what they might do to sign up to be speakers or to provide a written submission?
Sure. So members of the public who are interested in addressing the board during special meetings or board meetings, we welcome your comments. If you would like to speak live, you may do so by calling the board office or sending an email to request to speak by noon of the day of the meeting. The email address you would send that to is boardofeducation@rcsdk12.org. You may also submit written comment to that same email address, boardofeducation@rcsdk12.org, by noon of the day of the meeting, and all board members will receive your written comments, and these are also posted to the district's website by the time of the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We do have some business to take up before we get to our committee meetings, governance and policy. There is a resolution that the board has to consider. Now, just to remind you all, my colleagues would have me remind you all that we do most of our business through passing resolutions, or basically, like in Congress, there are laws. There are ways in which we communicate what the district and its committed staff must do. We pass these laws through these things called resolutions. And there is one resolution up for today, and that is Resolution 692. So I need a motion to discuss that Resolution 692. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams, seconded by Vice President Elliott. That motion before you is now before you. Are there any questions or comments to the administration regarding Resolution 692? Let me go to my participant list. Actually, I'm having a tough time getting that list. Does anybody have any questions? Because I can't pull it up for some reason.
We passed this at our last business meeting.
We did not, Commissioner Paul. We only passed the three finance policies and the student voter registration. This one was a later one that came after, so we have to adopt it.
Remind me which three we passed, because this is a finance policy.
Yes, we passed the budget transfer policy, the budget policy, and the purchasing policy.
Okay, thank you for straightening me out. Thank you.
No problem.
I do have my participant list up, and I don't see any hands being raised, so it seems that we are ready to vote. I'd ask that my colleagues make sure that your camera is turned on, and just indicate by responding to my question. All those in favor of Resolution 692 indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Seems that the ayes have it, Madam Clerk. That resolution has passed, Madam Superintendent. Next item on the agenda is our committee meetings. We have several committees. As I indicated, two are going to convene their meetings today. Governance is chaired by Commissioner Malloy, and policy is chaired by Commissioner Clark. So without further ado, I'll hit, oops.
No, Commissioner Powell.
Commissioner Powell, I'm sorry. That's right. Thank you very much. There was a change.
You're just keeping me on my toes.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for keeping me on my toes. But let's begin with passing the gavel to Commissioner Malloy. Commissioner Malloy, the chair is yours.
Thank you, President White. Good evening to the community, to Dr. Myers-Small, Dr. Jallow, executive cabinet members, my fellow board members, and thank you for everyone listening in tonight. Board governance deals directly with board oversight, or simply put, how we conduct ourselves and monitor our conduct as board members. and how we interact with one another in order to deal with our or determine our collective development needs. We help to coordinate training to enhance our ability to perform our duties as commissioners. And we're responsible for maintaining an effective working relationship with our superintendent. We also facilitate the orientation of our new members with our board staff. And in addition to welcoming of new board members, governance is also tasked with annually updating the superintendent and their evaluation tool. We also supervise and evaluate board staff, and we work with board members to modify as necessary the board self-evaluation tool, which we'll be looking at this evening. Finally, the governance committee organizes board retreats for ongoing professional development, and we will have one of those tonight as well. And we will continue to take input and recommendations from our state monitor, Dr. Shelley Jallow, to develop adequate governance policy. So we're going to start this evening by, well, actually, Kalia, you told us we do not have meetings to approve or
No.
to approve?
We have the minutes from the business meeting. We didn't do it in the special meeting. So if we can do that, actually, that right now, that would be a good.
Are these good from the February 2nd?
Not from the governance. We have minutes from remember in the business meeting last week, we didn't accept those. So if we can accept them in governance, that would be helpful.
May I get a motion to accept the minutes from those meetings?
Second.
Yeah, second?
This is for December 17, January 21, and February 4, right?
Correct. Yes.
All in favor of approving these minutes?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. Our first agenda item then tonight is a discussion surrounding the board's self-evaluation. The board's self-evaluation is required to take place publicly and precedes the final self-evaluations that will take place in June of 2021. This is an informal discussion relating to our annual board goals and our metrics, which include number one, improving the financial condition of the RCSD, increasing academic achievement, and finally, increasing equity for all students. So I think it might be best to proceed with maybe a round robin discussion of each of our board goals. And this is just an informal discussion to help prepare us for what we'll be doing in June. Notes are going to be taken on this by our board clerk, Ms. Wade, and they will later be uploaded in order to assist us with that final self-evaluation in June. So without further ado, let's see. Okay, you've got this on the screen. Can you enlarge that just a little bit, Ms. Wade? Okay, thank you. All right, so I thought perhaps that we could take turns. This is obviously the first time that I'm leading this discussion as board chair. And so I might ask for some assistance from some of our more experienced board members, especially Vice President Elliott and perhaps President White as well. But the first one, I just thought perhaps we could all throw some ideas out just around the first goal, which is improving the financial condition of RCSD. How do you think we're doing as a board as we work towards this goal? Is there anyone who'd like to start us off tonight? I'm looking at the participant screen. I don't see any hands currently. Okay, oh, go ahead, President White.
This be the first. I think we're making some progress, some realistic initiatives and realistic expectations have been set. We've had some very tough conversations about our budget and the fiscal cliff that we have historically met every year. We've made some, these are just some summary, some highlights. We've made some tough budgetary decisions over the last year and a half, including mid-year cuts this year. I think we've really taken a look in the mirror and determined what we need to do to get a better look. And when I say a better look, one need only look at Dr. Jallow's most recent report, quarterly report, that suggests in some detail the efforts that we have made, not perfect by the way, of course, to improve our financial outlook. It's going to take some time. I'm not, like saying what George Bush said when he stood on that carrier and said, mission accomplished. We've clearly not there yet. We have a long way to go, but I think we've made some progress. So thanks.
So I'm assuming you just want us to jump in. I did raise my hand.
I just realized I was muted the whole time. I apologize.
Okay.
My children were making a great deal of noise, and so I had to pop out and ask them to be quiet. Apologies. Commissioner Clark, go ahead.
I would tend to agree with President White, and I do feel that we are on the right track, but we do have some very important decisions to make moving ahead. When I look at Dr. Jallo's report, and she has the financial report, and basically we have some things we need to do because we still face a structural deficit, and we know that we're getting one-time funding but we don't want to keep kicking the can down the road. But I think we're moving in the right direction, and we need to make sure that we make the tough decisions when they do come up for the approval of the budget.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. I'm looking for other hands. Is there anyone else who'd like to jump in?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So the question becomes, have we or are we on the track of attaining this goal by the points that are here, the alphabet letters that are here, in terms of, can we say yes or no that we're moving in the direction? So letter A, reviewing and updating current policies to funding sources, expenditures and efficiencies to improve the district's financial condition. So I believe we are working on that. B, establishing budget parameters and priorities for cost efficiencies. So have we done these things that we are saying that we're doing, or are we in the process of accomplishing these things that we said we were going to do in terms of improving the financial condition of the district?
Thank you, Vice President. I see Commissioner Adams' hand. Go ahead.
So I think tough decisions don't just include where we can cut. We have to be bold enough to know there's certain areas that we have to enhance. And from my own experience in my other life, my other job, I've had to advocate because I work front lines, or you can call it. So they was giving us hazard pay, and then they stopped it in October. And then I had to advocate to get it back because nothing had changed. And for the low wage that I'm getting, I needed that. I deserved that. And I come to find out that there's just employees in the district on that low wage end that aren't getting essential pay or hazard pay. They got all kind of different names for it, but they so deserve it. These are frontline people, and I know we're not in a position to be able to try to just be doing more spending, but we got to be bold enough to know that we can not afford to lose, especially like when you're talking about the SSOs, they're on the front line. Some of these maintenance people, they're low wages. A lot of them got 2 jobs. So we got to be bold enough to, like I say, not just cut, but to enhance some things in our district, man, and not lose these good employees. With that, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Adams. I'm looking for other hands. Let's see. Don't see any other hands up at the moment. So I'll pop in. I am interested in just regarding this first goal. I would love to learn more about just what we've been doing so far in terms of equity for the school budget. I would love to see a comparison, side-by-side comparison of all of our schools and what we are spending at each of our schools just in one document to help better understand how we can address the equity issue. But I think that we're on the right track here as a board. And I know that there's just been an immense amount of work done by Carlene Pierce, but also by our finance chair, Commissioner LeBron, to meet these due dates. And I mean, we have a lot to do still, but I think we're really on the right track. Are there
So,
any? Oh, go ahead.
Commissioner Malloy, you talked about equity in the schools. Talk more about that, please. What do you mean?
Well, I would love to see just in general, what are we spending per pupil in each of our buildings? And what are some of the results that we're seeing in those buildings? Whether that's graduation rate or some of our test scores, what's the achievement gap there, if any? And how does that relate to equitable spending of our funds? So I think that's kind of what I'm interested in getting at.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but I look at equity a little different. I mean, when we see gaps, we know that we have to put more funding where the gaps are to bring those schools up to a level so that we have equity within the school system. And I think once we get to a point where we could achieve equity or we have equity, then we can begin to look at community schools and reducing transportation costs. But as long as our system is not equitable, then that's an impossibility because parents. I was at the Parent Leadership Advisory Council meeting on Friday, and it was a great meeting. But parents talked about the fact, parents want the best education possible for their kids, for their children, and we need to make sure that where more resources are needed in certain schools, those schools receive those resources so that we can build those schools up so that school A and school B, you can expect the same outcomes for the children.
I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you, Commissioner Clark. Do we have anyone else who'd like to weigh in on the first goal? I don't see any other hands.
I think the president was talking. You're
I'm
muted.
sorry. Go ahead, President White.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. I did want to add, sort of piggyback on what Commissioner Adams said, and also on the legislative breakfast, because there's a piece here in this particular priority that talks about relating to funding sources. There was quite a bit of conversation on, what was it, Saturday, Ricardo, about funding. And I was very pleased to hear unequivocally from our elected leaders, I think there's been a sea change. I don't know if it's going to mean votes and more money, but they are adamant about making sure that urban districts like Rochester get their fair share. If they are successful, we would have, for example, through the legislative breakfast, been part of achieving that goal, that priority. Because anybody who was there heard, I think every one of them say they were committed to seeing Rochester, New York State make good on, quite honestly, the assessment of the highest court of New York State from decades ago. So I was really encouraged by that. I'm glad that came up as an issue, Commissioner Adams. And I think that's another way in which we have met that particular goal. And I think if we do that, that could be a dramatic shift in our ability to provide the extra services that Commissioner Adams and other people are talking about. So I don't want us to forget that piece. As Commissioner Adams said, we talk a lot about expenditures and inefficiencies, but let's talk about raising the requisite dollars that we need to really fund some of the things that quite honestly have been underfunded. So thank you.
And if I could just interject here, I didn't raise my hand, Commissioner Malloy. I wasn't sure if you were able to see it. And so I apologize for that. But let me just also say what I said at the legislative breakfast. If we're asking for this money, we've got to be responsible for it. We cannot continue to say we need money, even if we get all the money that is due to us. Is that going to change academic achievement, or is it something more? I can remember when this budget started off years ago, around 300 or 400 million. It has gone up to $1 billion. How much more money do we need? And so I'm not saying not to have the money, but what I'm saying is that we've got to make sure that if the state and the federal government is giving us money, that we are responsible for those dollars and that we're showing that responsibility in increased academic achievement. We've asked for all this money before, we've gotten it, and that's part of what. And let me just talk about Assemblyman David Gant. part of his issue is that we weren't getting the results. Why should we give money to a system that is not an investment? It turns out to be an expense. So we've got to make sure that if we're getting these dollars, that we are representing our state representatives. We're not embarrassing them with the money that we're getting and still not educating our children. Money is one issue, but we have to look at some of the other underlying issues as well. That comes to, we got too many white teachers in front of our Black students. So we've got to look at changing that and getting that culture piece in line. We got to make sure that we've got our systems in line, because our systems are not talking to each other. So we can still have all the dollars that we need. If we don't have our foundation in order in terms of the right people in front of our children, in terms of our systems, in terms of stable leadership, it's not going to make a difference. So, I'm just putting that out there because that's very important, not to only always ask for dollars, but what are we going to do with these dollars now? We're going to have to put up or shut up. So I was encouraged that we have our legislators that are very, very supportive, but now we've got to turn around and make sure that we make them proud because they've advocated on our behalf and not embarrass them. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Thank you so much. I did want to highlight quickly, because we've been talking about the legislative breakfast. I just wanted to give a quick kudos to Commissioner Adams for the immense amount of work that he put in to prepare for that, as well as to our board staff. So special thanks to Kalia, to Francine, and to Rahima, but also to Commissioner Adams for that work and for really executing a great breakfast. So thank you so much for that. All right, moving on in the discussion, I don't see any other hands relating to our first item. So I think we'll move on to the second, increasing academic achievement. So obviously we are, part of our goal is focusing on increasing our graduation rates, but we know that's only one part of the academic puzzle. We're also concerned about, absenteeism, increasing our attendance rates, but also helping to improve achievement across all of our student groups, especially our most at-risk students, and giving people access to rigorous coursework. So we're going to work to, well, this is part of the ESSA committee, and it's the EESA committee, correct? Kalia?
Equity and student achievement.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's just ESA, Equity and Student Achievement.
Oh, okay, just making sure I wasn't missing something there. So in any event, let's go ahead and start our round robin on this goal. Would anyone like to start us off this evening?
I think this is a goal that we should, that is very important. This is why we this is why we serve in the positions that we serve in, to ensure that there is increased academic achievement. We're at, I think we're at 68%. My goal is that we get to a 100% graduation rate. So we've got a long way to go. But I think that, we've got to, as we've got here, well, we've got to offer courses that, our students would like to take. We have to offer courses that are going to get them prepared for post-secondary education. They should not be going to colleges having to spend tuition dollars on courses that we should have been teaching them within the Rochester City School District. So that's important, that we make sure that we are preparing them in such a way that they can transition from secondary education into post-secondary education. And even those students who don't want to go to or can't afford to go to, say, college, that we provide them with skills within our district so that they can leave our district and go directly into a job. And so those are the kinds of questions and oversight that I'm going to be looking for as we try to attain the different elements that we have here to increase academic achievement. That's going to be very important. Are we making sure that our children are ready for post-secondary, post-secondary education. That's going to be very important. And that's what we have to, make sure that we are accomplishing.
Thank you so much, Vice President Elliott. If I could pop in before I get to you, President White, before I forget what I was going to say, I wanted to say I feel like we're making great progress in many aspects, or in terms of a lot of what we see here, whether that's element C, where we're evaluating a study of K through 12 curriculum areas to ensure district-wide equity, quality, and consistency. They just put out the course catalog, which was very thorough. So that's, showing that progress towards that goal. And also at the legislative breakfast, we discussed potential courses like an online academy, offering students increased access to rigorous coursework. So definitely I see some progress being made just in those regards. I wanted to throw that out there before I forgot that, of course. I do see a few hands now. I think it was President White who was first. Go ahead.
Yes. Years ago, I had this mantra, which I did not create. It was a phrase you guys have heard many times before: what gets measured gets done. And quite frankly, years ago, was not measuring key performance areas. They were just sort of waiting for things to happen. And you could literally go to central office 15 years ago and ask them in March how many of your kids would graduate, and central office did not have a clue. The principals, some principals might have been measuring what needed to get done, but many did not. Since that time, we have traveled a mighty long way. We've gone up about 30 percentage points. Now, Vice President Elliott wants to get to 100. So we got another 30 to go. I'm sure she and everybody else knows that next 30, I see you raising your thumb, that next 30 is going to be even more difficult, because, the higher you get to the greater percentage, the more difficult the climb will become. But I think it's possible. It will take some time. I think, quite honestly, when we get to about 80%, 75, 80%, we're going to hit that poverty glass ceiling. And we're clearly going to need the help of outside partners to get to the 100% that everybody wants to get to. But we have traveled a mighty long way, and that we should be proud. But we, as Vice President Elliott says, we have a long ways to go, not only in graduation rates, but in other key performance areas, which I, consistently think that we should keep our eye on those prizes just as intensely. ELA scores, math scores, this is how we are judged. Not only by graduation rates, we have a long way to go in terms of ELA and math scores. And I have said to our current superintendent, who is going to be here for a mighty long time, that if she can turn that corner for ELA and math scores, those key performance areas, we would have pretty much become the district that folks expect us to be. A newer key performance indicator that hasn't been there that long, yet we get judged on it very harshly, and I think that's quite unfair. It's important, but it's just really become part of the lexicon, the conversation, which is college and career readiness. People weren't talking about that when I first got on the board. They were just talking about getting kids graduating. But it's an important indicator, but a lot of work needs to be done. And in that regard, people need to understand what the measure is for college and career readiness. It's floated around. It's not really clear what that is. Is it the standardized tests, the SATs, or is it PSATs, or is it not? I think there has to be greater clarity from the state telling us what that exactly college and career readiness is. But again, I think that we've made some progress, particularly in graduation rates, but we do have a mighty long ways to go in terms of ELA and math scores. And this is not going to surprise Leslie when I say this. I think that with her team, if they can turn that corner, and they don't even have to get to the final destination, if they can turn that corner and see what it's like to improve in that area, we will be the district, particularly if we get around, and this year, it's very, very possible we could be at north of 70%. And man, what a way we have come to get there. But people are still going to be concerned about those ELA and math scores. So I'm encouraged by Leslie's team, her focus. Today, even in our officers meeting, we talked about planning for next year. I don't know about you, Vice President, I don't ever recall us talking about planning for the next academic year this far in advance, which you should. But so, yeah, I think we've made some progress, but we do have some ways to go. Thank you.
Thank you, President White. I think the next hand that I saw was Dr. Jallow.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I have a few questions and statements. The first statement is about that course catalog. I do not think that's a document that you should stand behind. It needs a lot of work. It's outdated. It doesn't represent quality of academics or instruction, and it certainly doesn't represent equity. So it's a document that's a work in progress, and I don't think you should hold it up as a gold standard. And I know a lot of people are working on it, and I look forward to the work that everybody comes together to work on. But as it is now, even absent the most basic of information, what the high school graduation requirements are, is indicative of a document that is not ready for your scholars to use to help guide their trajectory towards postgraduate work, right? That's number one. Number two, on A and B, what indicators are you using to measure how well the district is moving along with the strategic plan, or how well student success is being exemplified in the district? It's 5 months in, and what have you seen that gives you confidence? And this is not a reflection on anybody or anything, but what have you seen as a board that gives you confidence about the academic achievement of the children in your district March 1st? If it's been presented and I missed it, I would apologize. But if you're going to say that you're doing it, there should be clear evidence that that in fact has been done. And then lastly, President White had made a comment about college and career readiness indicators are kind of like a moving target. But I would ask you to give consideration to the fact that under ESSA legislation from the feds and then to the state, it is very specific what college and career readiness measures are and what they use to measure whether or not a child has really demonstrated that they are college and career ready. One of them being the number of AP courses, or another one might be level of biliteracy. So it's very clearly stated how in this state college and career readiness is measured, and you can find that through the legislation or looking at maybe one of the ESSA websites as to what those indicators are. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jallow. I do want to add, in terms of the course catalog, I don't think I was saying it was like the gold standard either. I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on it. So I do understand that, but I am pleased to see that the work is getting done on that, and that, you know, it's a work in progress, and yeah, there's more to do. So thank you for bringing that up and that reminder. I'm not sure whose hand was first, so I'm going to go ahead and go with Commissioner Adams.
So I just, from a student's viewpoint, when you look at number 2 here, all it's saying is we want freedom. We want freedom. That's what this is like the most important accomplishment that we could possibly get and give to our students, man. Because if you get that academic achievement, you get that freedom. It gives you freedom to just to have freedom. I don't have to break it down what you're gonna do with that freedom. Just to have some freedom. It's just so important. I just wanted to highlight that. I'm done.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Thank you. Kudos, I agree. Commissioner Clark, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And on this point, I would say we have definitely made some progress when you look at the increase in graduation rates, but we have to be very careful because we need to look at where we're starting at versus the others in the Big 5 districts. And we have we have more ground to make up. So we need to make sure that, our achievement rates, our graduation rates, the number of students that are graduating with Regents diplomas, increase every year. And one of the things that we can do is, continue to look at partnerships with other with colleges and universities in the community, because I think, I shouldn't say I think, I was privileged to sit on many of the recertifications for the CTE programs at Edison Tech, with Jacob Scott. And when looking at the process they're using, making sure that when the students do graduate Edison Tech, that they're ready for the workforce in technical careers, and it could be bricklaying, carpentry, or whatever. But bringing in the real world and getting that real world experience, I think we're on the right track there. But I agree 100% that we need to make sure, and I think Vice President Elliott indicated that once our students do graduate, that they do not have to be put in remedial courses when they attend Monroe Community College or when they apply for a job in one of our local manufacturing or other industries. So while we're making progress, we need to make sure that we double down and do the things that we need to do as an institution to ensure that once our student, that the diploma is more than a piece of paper, that it's really a certification that they are ready for the workforce, are ready to attend college without, taking remedial courses.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. Vice President Elliott.
So let me get back to Dr. Jallo's concern and ask the superintendent about, improved academic outcomes and key performance indicators. Can you respond to that, Madam Superintendent?
Sure. I'm going to ask Dr. Morris because she oversees rather the strategic plan.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening, everyone. So thank you for asking for a little bit of information about our progress on the strategic plan. We will have a strategic plan steering committee meeting, which is a convening of the original full group on March 15th. So everyone who was involved in the original steering committee, which was the initial group that came up with the work that developed the platform for our strategic plan, we will discuss our progress on March 15th. At that time, we will discuss the progress that has been made by the task forces. If you remember, we had 6 task forces. We have high quality learning experiences, building strong community, fostering dynamic leadership, the professional development and training, and the human resource and capital and development task force groups. So all of those groups have been working. They have they will be presenting a executive summary that summarizes their progress thus far. They will be bringing their recommendations to that strategic task force summary committee, the steering committee, to show their progress and what they need in terms of decision making on a year 1, year 2, and a year 3 progress continuum. That will allow everyone to be on the same page in terms of our current progress, what we need to move forward, and what other additional support might be necessary. So that will be presented and in less than, it's about 2 weeks from now. So we'll be happy to share all of the executive summaries and the worksheets that come along with that. That will provide a summation of that work. And also yesterday we had one of the task forces, which was the
Ensuring an inclusive environment.
Thank you. So that one provided an overview of the work that they've done thus far. And they have really exciting work that they've done. So we're going to compile all of that together with their executive summaries and their worksheet with their year 1, year 2, year 3 deliverables and the work that they're doing. That will be brought to the steering committee, and then that will come to the board.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morris.
You're welcome.
Vice President Elliott, did you want to continue? Did you have something else you wanted to add, or?
Well, I just want to lift what Dr. Jallo is saying. We have to make sure that we know what we're doing and that we are accomplishing, based on what we've said we were going to do and the indicators and the outcomes that we're doing them. And so, the Equity and Student Achievement Committee is going to be looking at those things. And so it's important that we put it out there that that's what we want to, that's the committee's expectation, that and the overall board, I should say, because these are board goals. We want to make sure that we are attaining our goals.
Thank you so much, Vice President. Yeah, so we definitely need what this, for metric C, that hasn't yet been delivered then, correct? We still need that delivered? I'm asking, I'm sorry, Ms. Wade or Dr. Jallo?
Yeah, I think A2. I mean, I'm really, just to bring it down to its most basic, can children read? Can English language learners read? Can special ed children read? Can general ed children read? Can third graders read? Can ninth graders read? Just, I mean, I appreciate all the other work, but you're at a point now where, you know, and I'm really being very basic. What's their reading level? What's going on with math? You know, have we had an opportunity to look at that as a board? Because that's what you say there in your, that's how I read that goal, the A and B, especially B. Well, A too, because these are indicators that you put in your strategic plan. I think after they meet or whatever, as Dr. Morris described, those are the type of questions you should be able to answer when they come back and present to you, for you to answer successfully those indicators that you have there in goal 2 for the board.
So is that what's going to be presented, Dr. Morris?
So at ESA, which will be next week, we are going to have a presentation by the directors of English Language Arts and for mathematics. And also we will provide an update on the assessments for the upcoming school year. And then the following week, we will have a strategic plan steering committee meeting, which is where we're going to have an update and a discussion about the progress of the work on the strategic plan and those particular deliverables and outcomes. And that will bring to our next ESA meeting, where we can have that discussion about the outcomes that are being measured and what specific deliverables that we can provide data about relating to the strategic plan and its progress.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morris.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Vice President. Are there any other comments that people have? I mean, it seems pretty clear to me, at least, that we have a great deal of work to do on all of this still. So this is going to be ongoing in the next few months. But let's move on to our third goal, which is increasing equity for all students. And I'll just read right from here. With an equity and advocacy perspective, using both qualitative and quantitative data, the RCSD Board of Education will work in conjunction with the superintendent through the CIGR, Policy and Finance Committees to achieve this goal by, so we're going to be evaluating a study on community partnerships to ensure quality and a return on our investment, and respond to proposed policy changes to provide consistent oversight moving forward. And then metric B is revisiting the 2016 study of the managed choice policy and conduct a review of district placement practices from an equity perspective in order to ensure that all schools provide the same capacity per pupil spending, staffing, facilities for equity with, thank you, Kalia, with the intention to develop a process for approval for the entire Board of Education. And then finally, we'll be advocating at all levels for adequate funding. If I had to comment on any of these just to get us started, I think that C is really the only thing that we've truly maybe started delivery on. I would say just with Commissioner Adams and the legislative breakfast, that sort of advocacy is already taking place. If we could go up to the first two though, Ms. Wade. I'm not sure about A yet, or I think B we've spoken about. I think there's a task force that's in place, but it looks like there's a lot more work to do on that as well. Just revisiting what Commissioner Hallmark had done, that work. So I think C is really, we're in good shape to get started on C, but I think there needs to be more work on both A and B. Vice President Elliott, go ahead.
Thank you. Because I really don't understand letter A and us being able to accomplish that and its connection to increase equity for all students.
Would anyone like to
That,
comment?
that seems to me just to be, that's an evaluation piece of those programs. But in terms of how that is used to increase equity for all, I'm not exactly sure the way it's stated.
I wonder if maybe Dr. Jallo could provide some insight on that. I know just we had come up with this metric. We wanted to look at those partnerships. And I think I remember having a conversation with you just about the return on investment, that type of thing. I'm wondering if you can comment on that at all.
So I think Dr. Morris has shared in the past about the need to build capacity in the district for evaluating programs. And so she has put something in place for next year, I think next year or the beginning of the end of this year, to establish that and start to build that capacity in the district for evaluating. But in this particular case, you want to evaluate your partners to see how much money you're spending, what kind of service, what kind of scope of work, what kind of service, what are the returns, what's the impact on student outcomes. If you say you're going to have young Black men do something, gain something, stop doing something, then you should measure to see if in fact that partner at the end of their tenure with you has in fact produced that for you. So I think it's in how you choose your partners and the type of work you're asking them to do, and then seeing, well, if in fact they have produced. And then after you make that decision, do you want to continue to do business with them? Right now, you have many partners that you just roll over time and time again. Some of them are good and some of them are less than good, but you haven't evaluated to determine whether you've seen an impact on student achievement or outcomes. I don't want to just say student achievement because many of them help in many various areas. So it's a matter of stopping and measuring to see if they're actually producing what you have paid them to do, and make it that hard choice sometimes and saying goodbye. You're not serving our students, and goodbye, let's take that money and maybe get another partner or look at another way to address that student population and what their need is.
Thank you so much for that explanation, Dr. Jallo, providing that clarity.
Can I just follow up with her?
Oh yeah, of course, Vice President
Would that
Elliott.
be okay? I guess I just don't see this, Dr. Jallo, as being as pertinent when you're looking at external partnerships versus what we need to be doing internally. So I would have liked to have seen, what are we addressing within the school district in order to increase equity for all students? And while evaluating community partnerships may be something that we certainly need to do, I guess I just didn't see this as a segment that we should be doing in terms of the board goals, is what I'm saying.
No.
I just didn't see that as being a board goal. I would have seen, as part of increased equity for all students, I would have wanted to see, to I think it was Commissioner Malloy's point, the equity in terms of funding for each school. And, do we have, and how are we determining equity for our schools? That's another conversation. But once we've defined that, are we equitable across all of our school buildings?
I think that takes you back to the data discussion. And that's why it's important to look at indicators. So just to go back to the reading part, you should just aggregate it by different student population. And then that helps inform your decision-making about what kind of partners do you need. Do you need a partner that deals with children or addresses the needs of children who are new arrivals to the country?
Mm-hmm.
Children who've been here and can't have trouble with math, or, so I think from that standpoint, looking at your data to determine what kind of partners you need school by school, because each school has a different school community, I think maybe where this was related to, so that everybody doesn't have the same thing because it's not germane to the population you have.
So we may need to revise that a little bit, that statement. I'll leave it there for right now.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Yeah, I don't know if necessarily revising, but perhaps just having more specific metrics in place for it. I don't know how people feel about that. But in any event, I do see other hands. I do want to get to some other people. Commissioner Clark, I think you were next. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And I also wanted to go back to Dr. Jello's point, because it was a point that I raised a while back when we were reviewing grants that were being awarded. They were either through Title I, I think, but they were pass-through dollars. And the question I ask is, well, what role do we as a district play in writing those grants? Because even though they're pass-through grants, we need to make sure that those grants, that the work is being done, that's being done is the work that is needed in the various schools. And if we're not playing an active role, then is it really complementing the work that we're doing to increase student equity? But I also wanted to go back to point 3, and that was the advocate at all levels for adequate funding. And again, I do think that that Commissioner Adams did an outstanding job in setting up the legislative conference. I thought it was outstanding. But Commissioner LeBron and I were in the finance breakout room. And one of the things that we advocated for was some kind of cost of living adjustment to the city's portion of our funding, that $119, that it should be either pegged to inflation or pegged to a percentage of the budget. And I think that's something that we can't give up on, because the answer we were hearing was, well, you can't get blood from a turnip or from a rock or whatever. But for us to effectively advocate at the state and federal level, we need to continue to effectively advocate at the local level, because if we're all advocating for more funds, then when I say all, I mean both the district and the city, then the city really needs to look at their pass-through dollars and come up with a solution or a formula that would be amenable for the district so that we could get those cost of living adjustments.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. Commissioner Powell.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So to take things in backwards order, I was going to sort of give feedback on Commissioner Elliott's point, but as regards to our advocacy for local share dollars from the city, it is true you can't get blood from a stone, as the expression goes, but look, it's important for everyone to know that over the years since the MOE went into effect, the property assessments have been going up, and in order for the city to not collect more tax dollars for school purposes, they have been reducing the tax rate on the school's portion of the tax levy. Anyone can look at their tax bill and see that. But at the same time, they've been taking more tax dollars for themselves. I don't know for a fact that they've been increasing their tax rate, but they have certainly not lowered it, so that as the assessed values go up, they bring in more tax revenues, property tax revenues for themselves, so that the portion of the overall taxes that goes to education has been dropping over the years. And that's important for us to be able to articulate to anyone who tells us that we can't expect to get dollars from the city. It may not be reasonable to expect them to keep pace with our increased budgets every year. It may not be reasonable to expect them to keep up with inflation. However, if all we ask for is that we continue to get aid in proportion to the tax levy, that is to say, when property assessments go up, that our MOE should be able to go up in direct proportion to the increased value of homes. That's something that we should be able to articulate. The other thing that I wanted to say, though, going back to 3A, is about evaluating our partnerships. Now, I can't speak for Commissioner Elliott. I'm not sure exactly what her concerns are, but as I read this, we, the board, do not have the data to do this evaluation properly. That we have to lean on the administration to do the grunt work and bring us that study. It says evaluate a study on community partnerships. Doesn't say we're supposed to do the study, we're supposed to evaluate the study, which means the administration needs to tell us what steps they're taking to evaluate these community partners. And by evaluating, I presume we're talking about those whom we are paying some sort of consulting or contract fees in our budget. Obviously, it doesn't matter if we have community partnerships that are all volunteer. There certainly is no need to put a lot of energy into evaluating those unless they're actually doing harm. Like Lawyers for Learning or some such thing. If those kinds of volunteer partnerships aren't panning out, they're probably not doing any actual harm. But just to pick another partner, if we're talking about Pathways to Peace or Center for Youth, those are in fact partners that are getting a significant chunk of our budget, and they do need to get evaluated. That's all I got to say. But again, it's not our job, the board, to gather that data. We have to have a study to look at.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Are there any other commissioners who'd like to comment at this time? Oh, go ahead, Vice President Elliott.
Yeah, to Commissioner Powell's point, I understand what you're saying, Commissioner Powell. For me, I just don't understand why this is an important piece to address the issue of increased equity for all students. That's all I was trying to put on the table. I don't get it. So I'll just leave it at for right now. I didn't get why that piece was important, as opposed to us coming up with some kind of internal objectives that needs to address increased equity for all students. So I'm just not, I hear about the study. I just didn't, to me, it doesn't make sense being there. Let me just put it that way.
The reason I see it there is that some of our schools need more resources than others. And I see that as a way of getting those additional resources into the schools that really need it, so that we can begin to improve student outcomes and student achievements. And I don't see it as being balanced in every school, but it was almost like the question you raised at the last meeting when you indicated some schools needed certain levels of security and others didn't. And I just see it as filling the gap and bringing that school up to a level where the quality of the outcomes are going to be pretty much equitable across the entire system.
I guess if I can just follow up with Commissioner Malloy with Commissioner Clark, then we may need to expound on that, because here we are trying to figure out what it means, and it's not real clear. It may not be clear to the community. And once we leave this conversation, they may have questions about that as well. So I'm thinking that perhaps that needs to be reworded so that it makes sense to people within the community, because it really, I tell you, I didn't get it. I didn't get the connection. So thank you. Thank you for your input, Commissioner Clark.
Thank you.
Commissioner Malloy?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Wade.
Sorry, I can't raise my hand, but I wanted to kind of touch on that as well. I'll go ahead and work the notes from tonight's meeting into maybe rewording that. It'll be useful for the super eval tool as well. So that will be very, very useful. But I wanted to reiterate kind of what Commissioner Clark was. When the board did their brainstorming activity, that's what was the central theme, is that there was a concern about the level of resources allocated throughout the district. And so the comments from different board members at the time, and this was conversations that took place between August through to October, the comments on the board brainstorm was the fact that we need a metric that would address that equity amongst resources in terms of those partnerships and things, because some schools have a lot of partnerships whereas others don't. And I think you'll see in the budget book also where the community partners per school is listed. That's where you'll see that disparity. So I'll go ahead and try and wordsmith that so it gets to the point a little bit more clearly.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wade. Thank you. I do see another hand, Commissioner Adams.
I think we're at a time when we really can evaluate community partnerships better than we ever could right now. Some aren't allowed in, and we see what we're missing and what we ain't. Some are being very impactful without even hardly being able to get in there. I've been going to all my schools, and there's such a wide variety of difference in the impact some of these partners have made, and some of them haven't made any impact. And those are the ones that we need to say, well, we've kept them on. It's been the tradition. We've always supported them. We have to be able to say, no, we got to let them go. They're not being impactful. It's another way of managing our, and like one of the commissioners just said, we're spending a lot of money. We're cash cow. And if you're not producing, we need to do something different. And I'm telling you, on them, I don't have all these tools that they're talking about, maybe some of the administration, but some stuff is quite obvious when you go in these buildings, that there's no community partnership, or that there's a lot of community partnership. And there's a wide difference. There's a school I went to, one of the schools I went to, they got 4 different rooms. One room is full of food. One room is full of clothes. Another room is full of supplies for the teachers. I'm talking about pencils, erasers. I'm talking about full of this. It's so, in the community partnerships, it made this happen. And then you have another school, they just got a couple pair of shoes. And so I don't need somebody else to tell me. I can evaluate that myself. Just being in there, going and doing my visit. With that, I'm done.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Vice President Elliott, go ahead.
And after I say this, I'm done on the topic. But let's make sure that if we're holding our community partners accountable, that we're holding ourselves accountable. We can't expect more from our community partners. They only have a small amount of money that is allocated to them. We got the $1 billion. And so we got to make sure, if we're telling them that they've got to do the right thing and they've got to be evaluated, and that if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, at the same time, we got to hold ourselves accountable as well. So we can't expect them, because they only have them, a small amount of time in the day. We got them 6 hours or whatever the time is. And so we're expecting the community-based of the partners to do more than what we're doing. So I just want to put that out there. We got to be fair. Thank you. And I'm done.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. I don't see any other hands, but with that, I just wanted to say thank you to my fellow commissioners for such a robust conversation, and one that is really just getting started. I'd like us to perhaps revisit this briefly next month at our next governance meeting, just to see some more of the progress. And in fact, perhaps we can set up time at each of the following or each of the governance meetings for the next few months to kind of measure our progress as a group and just see where we're going in this regard, just in preparation for that June self-evaluation, the final tool that we'll be using. Ms. Wade, is there anything else that, oh, you have the schedule up there. Wonderful. Let's see, I don't know that I can see it fully, and I'm wondering if it's just my screen here or, there we go. All right, so it looks like, yeah, so we've done the self-evaluation, the required public meeting, and that's gonna be due on the 22nd of June. That's the superintendent deadline. When is our final deadline due? I don't see it on the screen, Ms. Wade. I thought it was the 30th.
Sorry about that. Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know why the screen is not sharing all of the slide, but I will pull it up really quickly.
The joys of Zoom.
I'm just gonna share this way. Coming up, we have the superintendent's end of year evaluation and the board's self-evaluation. And those are formal evaluations that take place through the tool that the board adopted, which is Super Eval. The retreat that is on the 29th of June is set for discussion, and so to facilitate the deadline for board members to complete the superintendent's super evaluation information is the 22nd of June. And then for the board to complete their own self-evaluation on the 24th of June to facilitate preparation for the retreat on the 29th.
Fantastic. Yeah, so although, you know, we have all these dates, I think this was a great conversation this evening to kind of get us started. But it's pretty clear that according even to Dr. Jallow, we have more work to do in a number of these areas. And so I'm looking forward to revisiting this again next month and the month after. And I do see a hand, Dr. Myers-Small, go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. As I'm just looking through this process, and I've participated in the super evaluation with the previous board, I really think we need to look at these deadlines, because if I'm submitting on the 22nd, it only gives you 2 days to look over quite a bit of information. So if respectfully, Commissioner Malloy, if you and I could maybe talk through that a little bit as the chair, because certainly I want you to do your due diligence in looking at my information, but it's a lot to look at, because not only are you rating me, you know, either highly effective, developing, or not effective, you're looking at lots of artifacts and evidence that's going to be loaded. And you saw what was in the mid-year, and that was just for the goals. So that you're going to see the goals for the full year plus all of the sections in Super Eval. So I think you're going to need a little bit more time relative to this. And I'm sorry that I'm just catching this now, but
oh, I am as well.
Better now than later. So I'd like to talk to you offline and
Fantastic.
then
We'll
give
do.
you some recommendations. Okay.
We'll do. Because yeah, I'm looking at this and I don't know how we'll possibly be able to go through all the evidence.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it. Kelia, do you happen to know, is the due date, is it?
It's flexible. It's flexible. That's all up to, so we can change
our due date as a board.
based on our, based on our discussion this afternoon. You asked me to push it out to a week, so I can add more time to that. So
yeah, let's talk that through.
Okay,
we can talk that through.
Okay. All right. Just initially, our next conversation will be next month then, to kind of revisit what we did today. Oh,
Amy?
Commissioner Powell, go ahead.
On that point, though, a question. The artifacts, we'll use that term, are just that, right? They're all documents we will have seen over the course of the year, correct? That they're
yes and no. Some things certainly, because the board section is what starts that evaluation off. So you should have seen memos, but there are, you know, the artifacts are video links, PDFs, website links. So not all of them you will see, Commissioner Powell, will have seen.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so we'll revisit that next month. Our final item tonight is a professional development retreat on collective bargaining presented by our HCI Director, Chris Miller, as well as our General Counsel, Steve Carling. Gentlemen.
Good evening, President White, Vice President Elliott, Commissioners. We have a slide deck. Thank you, Kalia. So this evening, as part of the professional development of the Board of Education, we were asked to present on collective bargaining and the Taylor Law. I am Chris Miller, and I'm the Chief of Human Capital, and I'm joined by our General Counsel, Steve Carling. The purpose of tonight, we're not going to get into specifics of any one contract or our negotiation strategy or our efforts. And we'd ask that you refrain from asking any specific questions about those, as we would reserve time in executive session for that purpose. By definition, collective bargaining is the process of negotiating the terms of employment between an employer and a group of workers, our staff, for things such as pay and working conditions. And this process takes place between, in our case, the school district and the unions. Next slide. To put our district and our city into some context, we have the following employee labor unions with approximate active employees as of recent. Several of these contracts, as you will note, are up, and as a school district, we are working to engage in collective bargaining. We began the process recently by meeting with ASAR, and we are preparing to meet with Bente. Next slide.
So start talking about the Taylor Law is what we refer to as the law that covers all public sector kind of labor relations. So in New York State, almost all employees have the right to be unionized. As you saw from our statistics, we have approximately 5,000 what we would deem regular employees who are in unions. We have over 500 per diem substitutes also in a union, and we have about 55 who were considered exempt in several groups. So a very, very small percentage who are not in a union of some type. What the Taylor Law really establishes not only that most people have a right to be in a union, but it then defines the rules for for how the employers deal with their employees, whether it's directly through the collective bargaining process coming to the initial contract, defining who might be in what unit, because sometimes there's questions about what employee class belongs in a particular unit. So you might have a hearing about that. And then once you have a collective bargaining agreement in place or a contract in place, which we call them CBAs, we refer to that in that manner. There's a body in New York law called the Public Employment Relations Board, which we always refer to as PERB, who oversees the interaction between the employer and the unions and its employees throughout the life of the relationship. And so PERB and the Taylor Law are kind of how we decide what are the proper way to deal with each other and improper practices, which we talk about a little bit later. Next slide. So this is just a quick, again, overview. PERB, one of their primary things is when you can't come to an agreement through efforts, then you end up going to impasse. If there's some claims of improper interactions, then they have the ability to hold hearings and even issue rulings on that. And we'll get into some of what PERB covers a little bit later after we get through the next few slides on negotiating for a contract itself.
So next slide. At a high level, there are differing roles for the superintendent and the Board of Education when it comes to collective bargaining and negotiating. And for the context of Rochester, we also involve the independent monitor in our negotiation strategy and efforts to go through collective negotiations. And so specifically as a Board of Education, you hire the superintendent, The superintendent, when time comes, sets the negotiating team, and that team could be comprised of several people who will ultimately negotiate at the table, or in our current context, over Zoom or Teams, on behalf of the superintendent and the Board of Education. And throughout that process, we would be bringing what we negotiate to the Board of Education ultimately to vote on, to, in essence, ratify and approve, in the same way that a union like ASAR, Bente, or RTA would bring what they have negotiated to their membership to vote on for approval. The agreements are negotiated between the district's team and the union's team, and again, that requires that ratification. And that collective bargaining agreement has the final say of the Board of Education because it has the financial costs in spending the district's money. And so those are important pieces of your involvement. And why we talk about that with you in executive session is we wouldn't want our strategy or our discussions to be out in the public, because we may come to you during negotiations to provide you updates or maybe even get your feedback or direction. Next slide. So there are mandatory subjects of bargaining, and those are subjects that directly impact the employees, such as wages, hours, and working conditions. And those are the mandatory conditions of employment. These are subjects over which we must bargain, and proposals can be made by either party, either the school district or the union. And you can see that there are also prohibited subjects of bargaining. You know, we couldn't bargain something that would go against law, such as the rules and regulations that are established for tenure. There are also permissive non-mandatory subjects of bargaining, such as how we go about conducting layoff or recall or grievance procedures. And you also, as commissioners, have some involvement in things like layoff or recall when we come to those decisions. Next slide. So we want to, and it's very important for us to, for both sides, both the district and the associations and unions, to negotiate in good faith. And as a school district, as a labor relations or staff relations, we want to build trust, and we want to have a positive, productive workforce, and we want to negotiate in good faith. And what this means is that we need to deal honestly and fairly at the table with one another, so that each party will receive the benefits that are negotiated in the collective bargaining agreement. Bad faith would be where either party pretends to reason to reach a settlement, but really has no intention to do so. And sometimes we see how bad faith bargaining might come into play in politics, but when it comes to negotiations at the table between the school district and our unions, we have to negotiate in good faith. We have to be honest and work toward an agreement. Next slide. So there are also things that we refer to as past practices. And a past practice is by definition any longstanding, frequent practice that is accepted and known by the union and the school district. And a practice meets the standards of being a bona fide past practice. It's considered to be part of the contract, even though it may not be in the contract. The key being that it's clearly established and mutually agreed upon between the district and the association. Past practices can be undone when the plain language in the contract is followed, when we choose to start enforcing the language in the contract. Sometimes there could be outdated language in the contract. We'd want to clean those things up. But for example, it may be a past practice to only suspend staff who fall asleep on the job. I'm not saying that that's what we do in the Rochester City School District, but if a staff member were to fall asleep on the job, we may decide that the follow-up for that employee would be to suspend the employee. But the contract may actually say that if you fall asleep on the job, you should be discharged. And so we as a district may not be following the exact language in the contract, that may be our practice. We could choose at a point to follow what's actually written in the contract.
Can I ask a quick question, Mr. Miller? I'm just wondering, in terms of past practice, would that also include perhaps like if we were currently, I don't know, like would that be like extending a current contract? Is that past practice to do that? Like if negotiations are stalled, or is that something that we do as a past practice?
Yeah, Amy, can you hold that question? They'd asked if we can hold questions until the end.
I think we'll actually, we're going to actually speak to that when we talk
Okay.
about Triborough.
Okay.
And Steve is going to speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't, did we click to the next slide? Go ahead and click. Nope. Yes, you can click to the next slide. My apologies. So preparation for the bargaining process. Prior to the contract expiring, right, we as a district want to prepare for negotiations. And so some of the things that we will make sure that we do is that we review the current collective bargaining agreement. We may want to review and have conversations with people that are in leadership positions to understand what in the contract is preventing them from doing something that they need or want to be able to do. So in our context, right, if we're looking at the Bente contract, we may want to have some good conversations with the food service director or with Chief Operations Officer Mike Schmidt to understand how the contract may be placing some limitations on the goals that he's trying to accomplish or that the food service department is trying to accomplish. So we want to collect that feedback. We also want to take a look at what we did in prior negotiations. What were some of the proposals that we made that maybe weren't accepted, or looking at what the union may have brought to the table in the previous negotiations to kind of anticipate what might come up again and to have some discussion or strategy relative to that. We also want to take a look at any agreements that were developed during the span of time that the contract was in operation, to just see if any of those agreements that weren't covered by the contract are agreements we want to fold into the contract. We also want to look at any grievances that took place during that time between the district and the association, again, with the same purpose. And so we want to do a deep records review. And then we also want to do some significant financial analysis to see where we are, what we can afford, and what are our goals, what is the strategic plan, what are the goals of the board, and how we can try to best meet those and what we put forward in negotiations. We want to clarify, who's on our teams. We want to clarify what financial authority we have, and then we want to engage the Board of Education in some capacity to get some sense of what their goals are. And that has been done in a variety of ways because we participate with you. We get feedback that you provide directly to the superintendent or through the independent monitor, and we build that into our work plan. And with that, then we set about developing ground rules where the negotiating teams or the chief spokesperson for each team come together to establish what the ground rules will be for negotiating and setting up a calendar for when the teams may come together and meet. And all of that then leads into the actual bargaining process where we come to the table and the association goes first, right? They're asking to negotiate. And so they present a proposal to the district's team, which we then receive and ask questions about and try to understand what they're looking for. And then we use that information to go back and have discussions offline away from the table to determine how we're going to respond or react to what they've proposed. Prior to negotiations starting, the unions have a right to request of the district information. They may want a list of all of the employees in their unit, what their years of service are, their salaries, their additional compensation, because they want to have a sense of what their members' perhaps financial what they've received in compensation has been. And that's information that they're entitled to and that we have to provide them. Next slide. Over to Steve.
So when you get to the table, some important points to remember. One of the things we start with is management rights. The management rights are things that are what were previously referred to as permissive subjects of bargaining. And it's important to hold on to your management rights as much as you can, because to surrender them during a contract negotiation means that you then have to negotiate to get them back. These can be things like, preset levels of discipline, starting and ending times of the day, the school day for us, transfers, things like that. And so what you have to be careful of is allowing those to become part of a negotiated process. Oftentimes the union would seek to include those in there in an effort to get some control over it. And all of our contracts have some examples of things that in the past have been possibly given back into the contract that we now have to negotiate if we want to get out. When you're bargaining, there's all ranges of bargaining levels as far as how hard you're pushing back and forth, how broad the spectrum of what you're actually bargaining about. Sometimes you go in and want to do what we call an entire contract review, where you're looking at literally every term and you make a huge proposal. And at other times you're looking at much smaller pods of subjects. You may only be looking at 5 items that you're bargaining over in order to get an extension agreement. And it often depends on how happy both sides are with the existing agreement, whether something really desperately needs to change, whether you need to get one item very badly, and so you're willing to give on a few other items, because it's really ultimately the ebb and flow of the negotiations that determines whether you're going to get to a contract. You usually walk in with some kind of a starting budget, and you have to get all the pieces to line up to get to that number, at least when you're the employer. So hard bargaining sometimes is what happens. You very rigidly stand by a particular position because you just can't give it up. You may agree to change other things, but you hold firm on one particular thing, or you very slowly agree to change. But what you can't do is bargain in bad faith. And that's what Chris was talking about before. There is no, you're not allowed to lie, for example. You can't claim that a fact it suddenly started existing that really is not in existence and get the other side to agree to a concession because of it. That can get you in trouble with PERB, and they can even come in and impose contract terms on you if you do that. The other thing that is generally not allowable is what's called regressive bargaining. It's once you've put an offer on the table, then the other side comes and presents something and you say, well, I've changed my mind, I'm backing off of my initial proposal. It's really only allowed in a few cases. It can't be done with an intent to not have an agreement. So if we were to walk in and say to a union, we'll take 2%, and they come back and say, okay, and you say, well, actually, I changed my mind, it's 1.5%. That would be frowned upon, unless there's some kind of change in what's happened to the parties between when the offer was made. This often happens when there's a long period of time during the negotiating session. You may have made an offer in one prior fiscal year, and now that you're in a new fiscal year, you discover a large deficit, for example. And so, or there's some type of a new legislation passed where the parties are going to need to start complying for safety reasons in a whole different way that's going to cost a lot more and be a lot more rigorous. You may be allowed to back off a prior proposal because it didn't account for that change. The other time it's allowed is if it's a conditional offer. We're offering 2%, but only if you go to a particular type of health plan, and they come and say, okay, we'll take the 2%. You say, but no, you have to have that was a bundled offer. You can't just pick and choose one or the other. Next slide. Next slide, Kelly. So, what are the implications for today's negotiating environment? Really, particularly in the district here, probably the two biggest things are the budget constraints and the deficits that we face. As you know, we have had some significant budget deficits. That puts the total package that's allowable as far as budgets really different than they've been in prior years. And then one of the other constraints is these seniority layoff and recall rights. These are non-negotiables. We cannot negotiate the ability to lay off somebody out of seniority order because they're governed by education and civil service law. If we were to do so, they would be deemed improper and overturned. We have examples, Chris and I both run into this, where somebody made a change in a contract thinking that it was for the collective good, but ultimately the Commissioner of Education comes in and says, you can't violate somebody else's tenure or seniority rights, and they will strike the clauses down, which is difficult if you built a contract around that as a concession, and then the commissioner comes in and turns it over. You're faced with a situation of having to decide if you nullify the contract and start over when you've worked so hard to get to it. So these are things that we always need to consider. These are kind of how do the non-negotiables and the the budget really affect the environment. It makes for more challenging bargaining times. It's easy to bargain when there's a full coffer, as you will, but we don't have that luxury anymore. So next, so as you're bargaining and things get difficult, sometimes negotiations just stall, and it does not seem foreseeable for either party that you're going to get to an agreement anytime soon. You're really hung up on particular terms. Then what happens is either party declares what's called an impasse, and we write to the board, PERB, and say parties are in an impasse. You can either do it jointly or either party can declare it. And then PERB appoints a mediator who is usually a very experienced person in labor relations, and often serves also as a judge. So they have some experience as far as knowing what is reasonable in the state and what's happening. And they come in and try and facilitate negotiations. And this can last for a series of years. It has for us. Buffalo is kind of famous for how long their contract was open. They had a mediator working on that case for 5 years, I believe, or longer. If you still can't come to an agreement after a period of time, and the mediator even feels like maybe we're not getting anywhere, then there can be a fact-finding hearing where both sides kind of put on an informal hearing. You present data, you present evidence, and you make an argument. The fact finder then issues a report and recommendations for what they believe would be a reasonable settlement of your contract. However, one of the things in New York's public sector, particularly with respect to school districts, is that it's not binding. So the report and recommendation would have to be voluntarily accepted by both parties. Now, it does do well to consider it, because often what the fact finder is recommending is based on some level of experience they have, and they do take the emotion out of it that either side might have. But again, it's not binding. So if the parties don't agree, you just go right back into more negotiations. The only exception, as we talked about, is if there's any kind of bad faith. If you try and insist, I'm not going to do that unless they give up something that is an improper bargaining area, or if there's a finding that one party is operating in bad faith, PERB does have the ability to come in and impose those terms, the terms from the fact finder, on the party, and the contract is considered to be binding after that. So what are some of those improper practices? As I said here, refusing to negotiate in bad faith or in good faith, insisting on negotiating for subjects that are impermissible, tenure, seniority, those type of things. One party just unilaterally changing the collective bargaining agreement. This could be not even in the context of bargaining anymore, but if you're operating in a contract environment and somebody just decides that they're not going to abide by a term, you can go to PERB and sit and declare their side to be committing an improper practice. And then they sit more as judge than they do as mediator, and they can determine if that's true or not, and they can impose penalties on the party that's doing that. So that's where PERB's other function comes in. They kind of act as a court of labor law in New York. And then a couple other examples: interfering with a union members by directly dealing with them. In other words, the employer is not allowed to go to an individual member and try and negotiate a special deal for them. That's an improper practice, and the union has the right to get that overturned. It has happened before. I've been involved in several instances where even a supervisor may be being nice and offering somebody more money than is in the contract, or they may offer them a bonus for something. You can't do that. You can't treat one member differently than the other members unless it's in the contract and allowable. The other problem is this is what Commissioner Malloy was referring to. When a contract expires, there is a provision. It's called the Triborough Amendment. It's a law that was passed years ago that says that once a CBA expires, all the terms of the expired agreement continue on. It doesn't have to be a past practice. It's simply what the law states. The only difference is if a contract provision is tied to a specific time period, which you'll see in some contracts, like a salary increase 3.0 for the year July 1 to June 30th of particular years. If that's how that reads, then once the contract expires, then you are not bound to continue giving raises, for example. But if any other provisions in the agreement have to go forward, and you can't decide just to stop abiding by any terms that are covered by Triborough, and for the contracts, generally most of the terms of the contract are covered under the Triborough and would roll over, and you have to abide by them or else it will be considered an improper practice.
So next slide. We have no obligation or no duty when we're at the negotiating table to say yes to the terms that the union might present or propose or offer. For example, if a union were to propose a 4-year contract of 5% increases each of those 4 years with additional asks of the district to make healthcare less costly to the individual members, the district is not obligated to say yes to those terms. We have to negotiate in good faith, and negotiations can involve great difficulty, and we have to just persevere through that process. And Steve spoke about some steps that might be taken if we're not able to conclude negotiations. Another item that the district can do is offer in the contract sunset clauses. And a sunset clause is where an item that we've negotiated or put into the contract expires. Maybe it expires when the contract expires, or maybe it expires at some other such date. And that's a strategy to perhaps protect both the district and the union with something that they want to try out, or it may have a very explicit purpose for why they only want to do it for 2 or 3 years instead of having it continue on through the life of the contract beyond and subsequent contracts. We also have to have just cause in terms of how we engage with employees and being fair and just in the work that we're doing relative to whether or not we're disciplining, discharging staff. So those are some of the things that we look at as we go through contract negotiations. Next slide. So at this time, if there are any additional questions, we'll be happy to respond to those.
Chris, can I ask a question or make a statement, just an observation, if possible?
Sure.
One of the things I've noticed is that the MOUs that have been signed historically is where often there's confusion in terms of, I mean, some of the MOUs are almost in complete opposite of what the contract language might or might not say. I'm sure people who've dealt with the union know what I'm talking about. So it may be important also, I don't know if you mentioned that or not, because I just tuned. Someone just hit a drunk driver, just crashed into my mailbox outside my home. So the police were at my door making a report. So I'm sorry, I had to take my camera off. But it was, the MOUs is where I found were over time the sticking points, because it's like the living contract is in the MOUs as opposed to what was written, in earlier negotiations. And are you finding that in your analysis as well?
I think given Steve's, I'm going to have Steve actually speak to this one since he has a longer longevity in the district.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there can be times when the terms of an MOU or MOA are significantly different than a contract term, and that's usually by design, because if it was not, then there really wouldn't be much need for an MOU, right? I mean, we would just abide by the terms of the contract. MOUs have, at the time that they're created often have some use. They're asked for by a particular side, oftentimes our own. The district has been the ones to put MOUs forward a lot of times because they need a change. The danger is if they are left open without any type of an end date, or if they are done by an administration that then quickly turns over. The danger is keeping people educated about what's out there in the MOA and MOU. So yeah, I mean, I certainly would recognize that the terms can differ significantly, but again, often by design. And so that's picking them up as you go into your new contract negotiations is a way to help fix that. You either incorporate existing MOAs or you cancel them and negotiate a term similar to or completely different, in some cases. But that's a way to close up that gap to the extent that they are ones that don't have sunset clauses in them.
Yeah, that would be what I would add, is that it's really important. So sometimes a memorandum of agreement is what we're talking about, and that's to develop an agreement between the district and the association that might resolve a very specific problem. And so sometimes it may be a problem that involves one specific person, and that agreement is for that person, right? So it doesn't require maybe a sunset clause, but a memorandum of agreement that can impact or involve lots of staff, we would want to try to ensure sunset clauses on those so that we are not essentially stuck with them. And so there are some instances of that from years ago that we may be living with. So that's why it's always important to have.
It may be worth looking at those, because for every issue that we've come up with, come to with the union, at times it appears that an MOU surfaces that may be counterintuitive to what the contract states. So it may be worth it. Just something I've experienced the last few years here.
Commissioner Adams, you had a question?
Yeah. Earlier, Chris, you had talked about an independent monitor. You weren't talking about Dr. Jallow, were you?
Yes, I was. So with our with the independent monitors academic and financial plan, it calls for us to ensure that we involve Dr. Jallow in not necessarily at the table negotiating, but in the strategy work prior to the negotiations and in the aftermath, so that she can help guide us and ensure that we're following through on some of the feedback that is in both of those plans.
All right.
Commissioner Malloy?
Yeah, thank you. I just realized I'm still the chair here, so I guess I should be calling on people because I'm still chairing the governance committee. I wasn't even thinking. I just instinctively was like letting other people speak. I did have a couple questions, and thank you, Commissioner Adams, for your question. I have several questions of my own. I'm interested to learn more about these the living contracts or the MOAs. What are some of the requirements of those contracts, and how many do we have in our district between different buildings? Is that a practice that we will be continuing? Do we have anything under review? I'm just curious to know more, if anyone can do that.
Let me give you an example of, so in a memorandum of agreement, as one example, APPR, right, the annual professional performance review process. We have to, we follow 3012D, which is the educational law that governs APPR. There was a successor to 3012D, and Steve, you might be able to help me. Was it 3012C, I think? But at any rate, we had to negotiate with the RTA and with ASAR to ensure that we evaluated teachers and principals in a very specific way that comported with the educational law. When a successor law came out, we had to go back and negotiate with both of those. So that's an example of an MOA that is really critical and important that we would need. Another example of an MOA may be where a specific employee, I'll give you just an example. We may have an employee that throughout COVID was working well above and beyond the regular terms of employment. The specifics of their job required them to be very responsive to all a myriad of issues that were coming up, nights and weekends, and nonstop, right? So I think an acknowledgement, right, that person is working under a salary, they're not paid overtime, they're not paid additionally. And so the district was approached by the members union to acknowledge that, right? So through a process of having discussion with the superintendent, with the independent monitor, with several of our chiefs, because the independent monitor's plan called for us to ensure that we have the management team, the executive cabinet team, meet to discuss whether or not something like that would be warranted, to then provide a stipend, a financial stipend, to acknowledge in some capacity the additional work that the individual was doing above and beyond. And so that particular MOA was for a specific person that had a finite period of time with some additional compensation. So those, I think, are two examples, but we have many MOAs that are specific to resolve problems or issues or maybe even a grievance. And so, they vary across the year with what we are presenting. I'll let Steve jump in here if he wants to add more to that.
To the extent that you're asking for a process question, Commissioner Malloy, then I think I can say that how MOAs always need to be approved by a superintendent because it's a variation of the contract. As to whether they needed to go up to the level of the board often depended on whether they had a monetary value that would exceed that which is given to the superintendent to deal with in contracting, which is the $35,000 threshold. So you'll find, there are often small MOAs that a superintendent would have signed off on that would not necessarily gone to the board. The process has been revamped now under a recommendation from Dr. Jallow. There's now a standing committee we call the Senior Management Review that meets every Friday. And it consists of the deputy superintendents and Dr. Miller, myself, Dr. Jallow, Carlene Pierce, Glenn Vanderwater, I think Marisol Lopez. And we review any potential MOA. Everybody gives input from their various angles on it. And ultimately, if a recommendation is made, it goes to the superintendent who has the final say. So the process is more buttoned down. There's minutes kept, so it's not as if people are operating. There's been a perception that people are operating in the dark. This was done to alleviate that. The second question that you asked about school level living contracts that's a creature of the RTA's collective bargaining agreement. There is a provision in there that schools can negotiate terms different from the contract in very limited areas. And there's a whole process in there that they have to have the school-based planning team and the principal have to first come up with a draft agreement. 85% or 80% of the faculty at the school has to approve it. It then goes to the RTA, who themselves has to ratify it, and the superintendent also has to ratify it. And until all those steps are taken, it's not binding. And oftentimes schools do come up with agreements that aren't ultimately adopted because they go too far. There have been some that have stepped outside the bounds of what is permissible. Some try to alter their school days, for example. That's not allowable because that interferes with transportation needs. So that's a whole separate process that is actually governed by the terms of one particular collective bargaining agreement, and that's in the teachers union contract. So those are the processes for those two questions you asked about, if that answers your question.
Thank you. That's helpful. I was wondering, though, how many approximately that we have throughout the district, and if that's a practice that we plan on continuing as a district.
School level living contracts you're asking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't give you a precise number. I would say it's less than 10 total. And I don't think we've had one approved, at least in the past year, probably more than 2 years since we've had one approved. So as to whether it's going to continue, I don't know. We haven't had a discussion with the superintendent about that. It would be her prerogative.
Right. And then I guess I do have a couple other questions. I certainly don't want to monopolize everyone's time. And I don't know quite how to ask this, but are we currently in regards to the triborough agreement, are we Are we currently experiencing that? I don't know how to ask this properly.
Well, I think if you're going to start talking about our specific agreements, we'd rather you do that in executive session because this does get into the area of bargaining that is permissible in exec session for that reason.
Okay, and so are we currently then in negotiations with our bargaining units?
Well, any expired agreement, we are obligated to be in some level of negotiations with. So yes, we have ongoing. And so, I mean, the two contracts that are open are the teachers and the administrators have been open since June of 2019. And the other two contracts with Bente and RAP are coming up for June of 2021.
Okay.
So
I guess the final question I have was, does the district ever refuse to meet with our bargaining units?
We can't refuse to meet with the bargaining units, no.
So we're not currently refusing to meet with them?
No.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question about, isn't there a provision in the contracts about parent involvement? Are parents a part of the negotiation process between unions and the district?
Parents are one of the groups that we, Chris can talk to his philosophy of negotiation building. I will tell you historically, particularly with respect to the teacher's contract, parent input has always been solicited, usually through PAC, which is now PLAC, a list of their interests in the contract are provided to the bargaining team. And there's an attempt made certainly to refine what it is that they're looking for and to include at least some of those provisions in the negotiating table.
I guess I'd like to see them at the table during the negotiation process. Is that possible? Not that you're just getting their input, but that they're actually at the table, because this impacts their children. So is that possible to have them at the table? Think about it and get back to me. But I just think that's important.
I think Dr. Moe and I are both kind of looking at each other. We can discuss that further with you, but at this point, we have not historically had that done. I've never been part of a negotiation where that is done. And maybe Dr. Moe has a different experience from his time in Syracuse.
No, I don't. And obviously, the composition of a negotiations team is one that you take great care in arranging, and it's the superintendent that has the ability to define who's on the negotiating team and who then is the chief spokesperson at the table. It's a team, and we certainly, I think it's very important for us to go out of our way to get feedback from as many groups and types of folks that we can to best understand what the needs are. And so I think through our involvement in various teams, whether it's CPAC or the REAL team, listening to what we hear at Board of Education meetings, but also direct outreach, right? All of those steps can be employed to get feedback from folks, to lead focus groups or to have survey data, to get a good understanding of what the priorities in negotiation should be. And then also certainly what the superintendent's vision and aims are, and what we also hear from commissioners.
Let me just say this, and this will be my final say. I am never satisfied with the way in which those contracts are negotiated, because it appears as if it is the unions that always end up with the deal, and the district is left holding the bag. I've just never been, and they, in the past, they use a lot of intimidation tactics, politically, financially, and even their human resources. And it seems as if we tend to sort of are subjected to that intimidation, because nobody wants to, don't want to be criticized in the media, and they do that very well. I'm a living witness of that. But it just seems as if that it is the unions that benefit at the expense of our parents and our students. And it's on the street that everybody has a union except our parents. And so I just see having parent representation at the table as being a benefit for and more of a win-win, if you will, with that input into even just them being at the table, I think will send a different message. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. I'm not sure whose hand was up next, but I do see that Commissioner LeBron has just arrived. So Commissioner LeBron, go ahead.
Commissioner Powell had her hands up first, and then I posted mine. So I don't know if you want to call on her first, and then.
Sure, no worries. Commissioner Powell, go ahead.
Okay, I was willing to wait. That's all right. To Commissioner Vice President Elliott's point about parents at the table, you know, this has been an ongoing discussion for 20 years, although it hasn't been a topic for many years, certainly not since a host of new board members have joined us. But it has come up many times under the umbrella of the parent involvement policy. First obstacle we have is one of confidentiality. You know, how do you find a parent who's I mean, the concept of having a parent rep on your negotiating team is that they would then take information back to their organization and share it. Well, they can't. There's confidentiality issues at stake during a negotiation. So what role would a parent representative serve? That's the first, you know, if they can't be carrying information back to the group. Secondly, let me just sort of recap discussions and outcomes from the past. We as board members cannot serve on the negotiating team. So it's difficult to comprehend having a parent, someone outside the organization altogether, with information about what's being negotiated when we, the board, don't even know what precisely is being negotiated and what the, you know, how those conversations are going. So those are just two of the themes, if you will, that have come up over the years past, that if we're going to have any conversation about it at all, have to come to the table along with it.
Is someone going to respond to that then, or any response?
I don't know if anybody in administration wants to respond, but I certainly like to comment on what she said, if that's okay, Commissioner Malloy. Are you okay with that, Commissioner LeBron? I don't want to.
Let me share some points, and then I think it'll fall along the lines of what you're also uplifting right now, Commissioner Elliott.
Okay.
So first and foremost, I want to apologize for being late. I have like a lot of things on my plate right now. And I did alert staff, so I don't know if you were all informed, so that's one. But two, this conversation about the contract, I will say my experience in working in certain systems has always been that when I go into these systems, whether it's to navigate or advocate through them, I'm often told that things are the way that they are because it's a rule or a policy or a law, but then people can't actually produce those things in writing. And what I've learned is that as the time passes, things become a habit. And so I share that in this context to say I would need to see that in writing. I would actually need to see the laws that say board members cannot be a part of the negotiations. I need to see it in writing where it says that outside individuals could not be appointed by the board to be a part of the table. Because although I've heard that in these 3 years on the board, I have yet to see that actually in writing. I think it puts, we are sometimes in a disadvantage because whatever's there remains there. And does have to be negotiated out. But what I would personally like to advocate for, and if it is a law and we need to push up on state legislators, state senators, state congressmen, is that the contract is actually negotiated by the entire community. And so yes, parents as well, but I often want to recognize that parents sometimes are at the tables and they're not prepared by the individuals that are asking them to be at these tables with the information that they need to like actually advocate for what they actually want to see as the end result. And we need to be prepared to do that. If we're saying we want parents, then we need to like provide that training and that support for them so that they're best prepared to go in and really negotiate and not just be sitting there throwing out something random that won't ever happen because it's illegal. So what I would like to see is a way for this board to figure out how to open up that contract, to have the ability for the community to have input in it. But also the contract is public. So I'm not understanding why things are negotiated and then what's finalized then becomes public, but as those conversations are being had. So perhaps I need more understanding on that piece, but I also want to understand where the barrier is to not have that be a public, transparent process. Because I will tell you, in School Board Fellows, I know that there are school board commissioners in other states and other large urban districts that are part of their negotiations and have parents and community members that their board agrees to have at those tables. I'm not understanding if it's a New York State thing or what the holdup is, but I would love to understand it, because as we're pushing up on police reform and opening that contract to the community, we need to be pushing up at the same time on this contract and make it available to the community to give input. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Vice President Elliott.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. This is so important. Well, first of all, let me respond to Commissioner Powell in terms of the issue around confidentiality. I think that we have parents in the district who can keep information that they may be informed about confidential. Some of us as board members don't keep things confidential when we're supposed to. So, you know, I think that that may not be the right thing to say about parents, that they cannot keep things in confidence. The reason I also bring this up has to do with the fact that it just appears that some of the unions have a strong hold on the way in which we educate our children. If we had other representatives from parents, from the community, I see that as being that the stronghold would be loosened. But some of these unions don't negotiate in good faith. They intimidate. They lie. You know, they don't get the right information, and they've got this power, and they've got this power seemingly over the Rochester City School District. So it just seems to me that having a few more people involved in this process would help to negotiate a far better contract and would give parents the power and the authority that they need to have, because the fact of the matter is, if our children and these parents were not in the Rochester City School District, nobody would have a job. And oftentimes, everybody in this district, everybody in the county are fed off of the plight of the people in this school district. And so we need to have, parents need to be, in my view, a part of this process. Because talking about poverty pimps, we all are. And we need to have our parents involved. And there are parents there, I believe, who can participate. They can participate on the professional level and can participate in a confidential manner. So, I don't know where this goes, but you hear what I'm saying. We've got to get them involved. And if I'm not mistaken, I haven't looked at some of the contracts in a while, but they alluded to parent involvement. So we just have to, from my position on this board, I'm lifting that up and want that to be a part of the narrative as we negotiate in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Did you want to say something in response, General Counsel Carlin?
Yeah, just briefly. I think that to Commissioner LeBron's invitation for some legal explanation as to the bargaining laws in New York specifically, I'm happy to provide that in a closed session or executive session with you all very shortly. We'll just schedule some time and I'll walk through. New York is a little bit unique in some aspects, and I can talk through the nuances of that with you, as counsel, and then we can talk about where that goes from there, in whatever other form you'd like, but I'd like to give you legal advice, at least in a closed session.
Thank you, Mr. Carling. I noticed there were some other hands. Commissioner Clark, I saw your hand, but then did you lower your hand?
I did. I decided I'd raise my question in executive session.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you so much. Commissioner Adams, go ahead.
So per PERB, that's who, that's one individual or a group of individuals. They make sure that the bargaining in good faith is going on.
It's a group, correct. It's actually it's a public body. It's the Public Employee Relations Board. It's a board of appointed people. There's a commissioner over it. There's deputy commissioners. It's structured like it's a governmental organization. Yep.
Okay, so no one side picks these people.
No.
Okay, no, because basically you're saying that a person can't get up there with alternate facts negotiating, and I'm just glad to hear that. I'm just glad to hear that. All right.
That's a nice way to say that they can't lie. Yes, we can't get up and lie. That's correct.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Do we have any other comments on the presentation this evening? All set? Well, thank you so much for all of these questions. And I just want to say thank you to Dr. Miller. I'm so sorry I called you Mr. Miller before. Dr. Miller, for your presentation, as well as to Mr. Carling for that wonderful presentation on collective bargaining. And I'm sure there will be further questions. But with that, that concludes the Governance Committee portion of our agenda. Our next governance meeting will be April 5th, 2021. And with that, I pass the gavel over to our Policy Committee Chair, Commissioner Powell. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Process question. There were questions that folks wanted to ask in executive session. Shall we just carry that forward after the Policy Committee rather than go into executive session, ask our questions, and then come back out?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm glad everybody's on the same page on that. Okay, so the Policy Committee agenda currently has 4 items, 2 standing items and 2 discussion items, but I'd like to add one more. I'd like to begin the conversation about Policy 2410 revisions. Is that acceptable to anyone? Any objections on that agenda? Hearing none.
I'm going to actually just ask for clarity on adding that item. We're not prepared to talk about it because
I understand. It didn't get out to everyone. I just want to talk through at the highest level what I've attempted to do in that draft, and then we will actually tackle it next Policy Committee.
Okay.
I want to make sure that folks have at least a brief passing understanding of what's being proposed, and then we'll to try to channel people's thoughts and as they read it more carefully between now and next meeting. Okay?
Okay.
So the first item is the Policy Manual Subcommittee update. Rahima, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. The Policy Manual Subcommittee continues to meet per our schedule. We have just completed the review of the second block of policies. Those were sent out to both the Executive Cabinet as well as CPAC parents to provide input, which they will have 30 days to submit. We did receive today CPAC's recommendations in relation to the first policy block that we sent them. And so that has been shared with the committee to review ahead of our March 10th meeting. Additionally, given the upcoming budget season, we made a change to the policy review calendar. Finance policies were scheduled to be reviewed after special education, which would have put them in April and May, the height of budget season. And so we went ahead and swapped them with the school's policies. So now, and this updated calendar is posted to the Policy Committee webpage. The updated calendar now will have the schools policies being reviewed in April, May, and June, and then we will go back to our finance policies for July and August. This does not include policies that were specifically called out in the state monitor's plan. Those continue to be reviewed separately, and so they can remain on schedule. Thank you.
Commissioner Powell? She turned it back over to you.
Thank you. Okay, the next agenda item is the NYSBA policy update. There is one new requirement. Well, I'm not sure how new. I'm going to let Steve Carling talk to us about that.
Yes, good evening. Briefly, this was relatively recently sprung on us. There was a law passed by the state Senate and Assembly late December. We kind of figured it out in January. NYSBA just pushed out a policy on it. It requires that any single occupancy bathroom anywhere in any school building or any district-owned facility needs to be redesignated as a gender-neutral bathroom. There's certain terms you can use: unisex, gender neutral. You can use two symbols if you want, something inclusive that no longer shall be designated male and female single occupancy bathrooms. So that law takes effect on March 23rd. I shared this recently with Mike Schmidt so he can prepare to get signage in those, in the buildings. It does not require that we create these bathrooms. It simply says that to the extent that they exist already in any of our buildings, that we need to redesignate them. It also requires that the board adopt policies and practices. That's the way it states it, policy and practices. We believe by adopting this policy and then just directing facilities to change the boards, that we will be in full compliance. So this is relatively recently, as I said, this is coming at you guys quickly, but it's also just come to us relatively quickly. So this is what is in law almost verbatim. It's a very short law.
Steve, is that just a placeholder policy number? It seems like a weird.
I'd use it. Here's why. It's in between. The two current policies we have are 0100, which is our anti-discrimination policy, and 0110, which is our sexual harassment policy. This dovetails nicely into, it falls right in between them. It's also, this is currently something that we're doing some work on behind the scenes. I'm working with the superintendent, and we're expanding some of the regulations around some of these areas so we could tie them all together. I think if this is what NYSBA's recommending, that we use it, because then we'll be consistent if they send updates or changes, we'll have it, in our system. So I think it makes sense as to where they chose to put it.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Any questions on this topic?
Yes, I have a question. So let me just get this clear, because there would be some families who would have an issue if it were in, having the opposite sex to come into other bathrooms. So what I'm hearing in this policy is that, one person goes in at a time into these bathrooms. So it could be a girl going in at one point or a guy going in at another point.
These are only single occupancy bathrooms. That's correct. These are ones that already exist, generally for staff, but we do have some, and depending on the building, we have some student bathrooms like that as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? I can't see anybody beyond my.
Hey, Steve, other than why is this necessary to do?
There's a new state law that was passed on it. We have to.
Yeah, so why? I guess I'm just wondering why this is even necessary, in all honesty.
Well, I don't know. The legislature passed the law. I'm just here to tell you that we have to
Yeah.
comply with it. Sorry. There was an explanatory memo. I think it's to compel that it's easier for people who are transgender, gender nonconforming, or something to not have to go ask to use a different bathroom. This just provides that if they're already there in single stall, then what's the big deal? Just let anybody walk into whatever one they want. You see it actually at a lot of restaurants already. It's happening that way. It's just kind of they designate them both, and I think this is just society catching up, the legislature catching up with what's happening in some elements already. That's my best guess, but all I know is the law passed and it's got to go in effect by March 23rd, and we're going to be in compliance if I have anything to say about it.
So that leads me to my next point. Because of the short fuse, the sooner we get this out of committee, the better. It is very, very brief policy. You could read it just in the course of this meeting. I would happily entertain a motion to move it out of committee to the full board.
Motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
I'm going to oppose.
Okay, we did have enough ayes to carry. So this policy will begin to work its way through the 3 steps of policy adoption. If it looks like we're not going to be able to hit that deadline, we do have the prerogative to waive our policy adoption rules. So Steve and Rahima, if you will keep us, make sure we do whatever we need to do to meet those deadlines, okay?
Yeah, I think the next business meeting is the 25th, right? Am I correct on that, Rahima?
Yes.
If the policy passes a few days after the deadline, that's in my mind not the end of the world, as long as we actually do it before that, and so, which the superintendent can just direct us to do, and then we can adopt the policy so that in the future it continues to be done. I'm okay with that. I wouldn't want to let it go too much further past that, though. So if the next committee we could just push this up into follow our 3-step process, or I would ask the board to just entertain waiving the process and put it on for general vote on the 25th. That would be.
Steve, I would think that single-use bathrooms wouldn't have a sign on them anyway.
They do. Most of them do.
They do?
Designate. There's male and female faculty bathrooms all over the buildings. It's pretty common. So we do need to change the signage.
Right. Now, to answer your question, Steve, we can do any and all of the above in terms of, we can add this to any of the, to the beginning of any of our committee meetings as a special meeting to begin the discussion. And I would encourage that before we out and out waive the policy, because we do want to encourage people's feedback. We want to have the discussion in open forum where people can sign up to speak for or against, even though it is being driven by state law. Okay?
Mr. Powell?
Yes.
So for right now, just so that people can know, in an effort to do that, I'm going to plug it in for a review in the special meeting of ESA, and then also we're going to do audit. We won't be able to do it in finance because finance is designated for the budget presentations. So it'll be March 9th, and then again on the 23rd, and that will allow us to vote, the board to vote on the 25th.
Excellent.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Any objection to that timeline? Good. Okay, super. That takes us to our first discussion item, policy action on grants award policy, number 6256. Steve, the floor is still yours.
Okay, I believe this was before the group once before. I believe that there was a suggestion, and I can't remember whether it was you, Commissioner Powell.
I think it was Commissioner LeBron.
Thank you, that there would be a presentation. So I brought this back to administration, and after some consultation with people who are involved, it was suggested that the final paragraph, that in addition to having a quarterly report of all newly awarded grants stating these things in the table, it'll look a lot like that contracts under $35,000 that you get quarterly. This will be a report that'll look like that. That was a suggestion of Dr. Giles. It was very helpful. And then in addition, there will be a yearly presentation to the full board in Finance Committee in October, it was suggested, discussing kind of how a retro, like a look back as to how grants were utilized in the prior year, but also the plan to use them going forward, what we're looking at, what we're trying to get our hands on, what we've already acquired, how that money is being utilized. And that would be a kind of a broader picture presentation in the October Finance Committee meeting. So that's a suggestion that came forward from, I believe it came from Dr. Morris and Carrie Pecor and grants. And so that's what's been changed to the policy, and it is now at least as finished as it's going to get, unless somebody has another suggestion.
And so the floor is open. Commissioner LeBron, your hand is up. Oop.
Yeah, thank you. So Steve, thank you and the administration and Dr. Jallo for updating this and feeding that in, because what I didn't personally want to see is that we left it so open to interpretation that year to year we could be presented different information, and we should have a focus on this. The only last piece I want to understand is, so we get the grants, right? But a lot of grants require either additional partnerships and collaborations, or hiring a consultant to do the work that the grant is affording us, to use the dollars to move the money that way. I want an understanding of how consultants are selected or how partners are selected. I don't know if that necessarily needs to be in the policy, but I certainly want to understand how we are making that more equitable. And I know that we have talked about this before, but I feel like there has to be a process in place for us and whoever is overseeing grants in any department, that we have an understanding that there is some intentionality to ensure that, yes, it's the best person, not just because I know them and I have a relationship with them, but also that the equity piece is in there. Beyond the MWBE stuff that we be reporting, because I have a lot of issues with that. So let me just put that out there.
Okay, I mean, I am not the be all end all on this by any means. There's tons of moving pieces around this. I can say, as far as an assurance, that these are treated the same as contracts, which means that most of them run through my department at some point. If we're going to enter into an MOA whereby we are acting as a pass-through on the grants, that comes through our contract group. And I know that Tim Schmatt and his purchasing group do a lot of the RFP work, RFI work when we're joining with partners. So I don't think we need to put anything. I would say, this is just what my point. I don't think we need to build anything more into the grant award policy, because it's all subject to the same purchasing rules that we follow with the other vendors and contracts. We were just experiencing something like this with a particular one, and I learned exactly how it works. Oftentimes the grant awards themselves dictate which entity, if there's two entities named, for example, which entity's purchasing rules will apply. So whether we're a partner, the grant will tell us which one of us is the one in charge of the purchasing and which one is just in charge of getting an agreement in place to spend the money. So it's so nuanced between how we get it in from the state, but to the extent that we are the agent in charge of the securing of the vendors, we rigorously follow our purchasing rules. And Dr. Jallo and I have had a long conversation about this, multiple ones, in fact, about the board not deviating from our normal purchasing rules when it comes to these grant funds, because it's really in essence the same. It should be treated the same. So
just for clarity, are you saying that purchasing is where I need to be looking to make sure that the equity is in purchasing? The other piece I do want to uplift is that when I'm talking about grants, I'm definitely not just talking about state grants. We get grants from lots of other places, and those grants, we are writing those grants. Somebody submitted them to an organization to receive the funding. And as we're in the beginning stages of writing it, partners sometimes do have to be identified up front, long before they ever hit any purchasing process internally. I want to understand how those partners are then selected into the grants and who's writing them. And I share this as someone who has worked grants. I'm currently writing a grant. I had to self-identify the partners to support the work that I'm trying to accomplish as an outcome. And it just kind of reminds me of like, okay, we do have a lot of grant funded programs and opportunities within our district. They're not just all the state. So whoever's writing them is also selecting these individuals. And even in the contracts under $35,000, if folks review those and you go back and you pull them all together in a year and do a comparison year to year, because we get them quarterly, you will see it's a lot of the same repetitive individuals that are being named under those $35,000 ones, and certainly come up at least once every year. And I'm concerned about that, because when we talk about educational outcomes, our focus, and I say ours as like a common theme, is that it only is like the teachers in the classroom. And we spend so much money and time and effort chasing these dollars, getting these grants, getting partners. And there has to be some accountability there too, if we're paying for these extra support services and we're not seeing the outcomes. So I will definitely look more into purchasing through the finance lens to see what process is in place. But I'm also wanting to ensure that there is an equity tool in place, so that as we are identifying partners, that is done equitable across. And if we had a partner for 2 years and the outcomes weren't there, why would we then write another grant to another agency and then attach that partner to that grant? Like, those are the things I don't want to keep repeating in this district. And I feel like at some point we have to say stop and figure out a different path, because this path ain't working.
Okay, so some of the points you're raising there, Commissioner LeBron, would come up during the presentation in October by edict of this policy. Let me call on Dr. Jallow.
Thank you. I just wanted to raise another point similar to what Commissioner LeBron is talking about on the front end when you're first writing these grants. I think at some point there needs to be a process or protocol for you to review the grant when you initially decide to pursue the grant. Because sometimes when you write grants or you pursue grants, there is a fee, there is a cost, there's an indirect cost or another cost that you have to make sure is in your general budget in order to cover as part of the grant. And sometimes that gets missed until later on when you're trying to scramble and find the money that you had to put up in order to be awarded the grant. So I think it's important. This policy is fine, but I think there's something to be said about some kind of protocol to look at grants when you first decide to pursue them and what they might cost you in addition to what you might gain.
Those are certainly thoughts that I've had over the years, Dr. Jallow, and hoped very much that we could start getting a handle on that at the front end. Again, I think when we begin to see the total picture of grants when they're presented to us in October, we can start providing the administration with input as to what we don't like about those. Obviously, the administration has to have some sense of what the costs are when they're submitting these. And in the meantime, between that date and the October review, the superintendent is taking responsibility for those imputed costs. So I think that I did see another hand, one of the administration, but it went down again.
It was me, Commissioner Powell.
Please weigh in.
Thank you. So I just wanted to mention that in the grant life cycle, so when we initiate the proposal for applying for a grant, and when we go about trying to determine who's going to support the grant with contracted work, we go through the standard RFP process. So Steve talked a little bit about purchasing and their role, and also that legal has a role. When we come and we do our overview in October, we can just review the RFP process, because we follow that process that's legally defined in our ability to procure a contract. So whether it's a larger contract or a smaller contract, we use the RFP process to try and find consultants to support this work. So we just recently went through a grant writing process where that's exactly what we did. We had to put out the RFP, and we had to look to see who was contracted. Who proposed that they had services that we could contract with. And that's what we had to use in order to pursue that grant application.
Commissioner LeBron.
Thank you. I was just waiting, but so just for clarity, so you're saying before we even get a grant, we're doing a request for a proposal out there?
Yes. So I just
For
lived
all
this.
grants. I just need to understand if you're saying that this is the process for all grants or for state grants, because again, those are two separate type of grants.
I agree, they're different types of grants. So depending on the grant that I'm referring to that we just pursued was a federal grant. So the grants and when we're looking for contractors, in some cases, you can go through the RFP process to determine who your vendor is going to be. So as I said, I just went through this a couple of weeks ago, so I can at least talk about it from direct experience, but probably not all. I don't want to say the word all contractors are procured this way, but we can go through how are contractors selected. But I did want to at least assure you between now and October that there is a process for obtaining contracts and contractual agreements with people when we're trying to determine grants. And one of those is by following the standard RFP process that we have in place.
So I'm going to request that we get a list of which grants are going through that process and which ones are not. And I do want to uplift what Dr. Jallow was saying. This is historically part of the district's kind of history of getting grants, not being prepared for them, not utilizing all the dollars, having to send money back, which is frustrating for both the funders who give us this money with the hopes that it's going to make a difference, and then we fumble the bag, as they say, and don't do what we need to do to ensure that those dollars are spent the way they're intended to be spent. But we also don't do a good job, as Dr. Jallow was mentioned as well, of making sure that as we're pursuing these dollars, that the individuals who are going to be expected to do the work or are going to be impacted by it are even aware half the time. Sometimes they're just being told, like, we just got this grant, this is how you're going to roll this out. So I just want to make sure that there's some clarity around all of this. And I would also like to understand which grants are going through the RFP process and which ones are not. And then also compare that to the 35 and under list that we get quarterly and see how those are tied into grant funds as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I anticipate all of that would come up in October when we do our annual review. Any other input? Is there any particular discontent with what's being offered right now for a policy? Anything else that we need to be considering? Hearing none, I'd be eager to take a motion to move it out of committee.
Motion.
Okay, I have a motion. And Amy, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No opposition, it carries. Thank you very much. That takes us to our fourth item, discussion item on the code of conduct. Now, initially, there was a thought that there would be a robust disclosure of where we're at with code of conduct, but I think it's going to end up being a more of a information item from Steve.
Correct. Yep. The good news is that we have finished the review of the code of conduct with the climate committee. We've walked through, and every provision is there's a proposal, and a red line version has been, I think, finalized this morning, possibly from Rahima. So we are considerably further than we were 2 months ago, and it's really through a lot of really hard work, which I certainly have to, appreciate, at least from my brief time on here. I know Carl spent a lot of time going through this, but in my few months, at least, with Melody and Rosemary Rivera and Chuck Allen, we spent with Rahima facilitating. We spent a lot of hours over several weeks trying to bring this thing home, and I think we finally have. We got a lot of good consensus, and it's a much different product now. So we are going to be prepared. We're aiming to give you the board a final copy of the redlined changes to the existing document about 2 weeks before we bring it to you. We want to bring it to you to the next policy committee meeting is what we're suggesting, which would be April 6th. But we want to give you about 2 weeks lead time on it because it is a bulky document. There's no way around it. It with appendices is somewhere in the 80+ page range. It was before. We didn't add that much to it. I promise. We're not bulking it up. It's a big document, and there's really no way around it. I think in some places we really streamlined it. We tried to be much more thoughtful. I think you'll see an emphasis on restorative versus punitive, while balancing those legalities that we have to maintain. And I'm happy. What my plan would be to, at the April 6th meeting, you will have the red line document, and I will actually walk you through every change, and I'll have talking points, and we'll have people on tap ready to answer questions from the administration side, and whatever other special guests you would like. We'll be ready to talk through why ultimate conclusions were reached as far as what is in the new proposed code. Providing that goes well, we would then schedule a public hearing, I think in April, and have it ready to go, after that with comment, and if we need to take anything else, and then we'd have it ready to bundle up and I believe vote Kalia May, I think we're looking at possibly. Or Rahima, one of the two of you. I think that's what we're looking at as far as timeline.
Yes, it would be in.
All right, I got it right. I didn't mess them up. Good. All right. So anyway, it's been a lot of work, but I'm happy to have delivered this product, at least for now, over the finish line, because it was really it was time. And we'll get a product in front of you, and we'll talk it through, and then we'll hopefully get it finalized by May, which would give us get us in line with our annual review of it.
Okay. Any questions for Steve on the code of conduct and where it stands right now?
Yeah, Commissioner Powell, I think that a while back, my concern is our whole suspension process. And if I recall, Carl would advise me to wait until the code of conduct was done. Mm-hmm. And if you recall, I know some people may not have gone through the process of suspensions, or in any event, by the time the students would have been suspended, and by the time it gets to the board, they've already returned to the classroom. So we're asking to approve a process. Yeah, Commissioner Clark, you may not have been a part of this process. So by the time they were suspended, say maybe in September, and then, they're going back in October, but we're going through the process because they've asked for an appeal, say in November. It just didn't make sense that we would go through that process. And so what Carl said is and I may have this off a little bit, but wait until the code of conduct is completed. And I don't remember if there's something within the code of conduct that speaks to the suspension process, but I'm looking forward to having that discussion, that we're not, that whole process that is long and drawn out and works, in my view, to the detriment of the student, is something I'm looking forward to having discussions about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do you want to expand on that, your answer at all, Steve, or just acknowledge what she's saying?
I mean, I will.
And that's fine. That's fine.
It's not, yeah, it's more a function. Most of the timelines are functions of law than it is the code of conduct itself. But we can talk about the difficulties of some of the challenges as we go along.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
And any other questions, comments, observations? All right, seeing none, we'll go to our very last item. I put together a revised version of policy 2410 in accordance with the guidance that I asked for from you, the board, last policy meeting. Rahima is bringing up the draft, and you see that it is very messy. What we've had to do is try to merge 3 policies, separate policies together, along with a regulation 2410R, which really wasn't really a regulation at all, but really random thoughts about how to implement a policy adoption process. One of the things I'd like to point out to you is item number 1, right from the get-go. It has not been obvious to any observer. Don't scroll any further, Rahima. Initiating a policy or a new policy or a revision is intended to be a very democratic process that can be initiated by anyone, by members of the community, by our parent group, by the administration, or by board members. And the method for initiating that is to complete the Form 2410E, describing the policy suggestion, describing a justification for that, laying out some potential language. A lot of the revision is designed to highlight that point, that once a suggestion has been made, that it needs to be channeled to the board president to be in turn remanded to the policy committee. Okay. Moving down to the review, this is where a number of the other policies, 2460 has been inserted. That's why you see so much red there. And the bullet points were replaced largely with narratives. For instance, the beginning, while the existing language suggests that it has to do with the superintendent directing, in practice, it does start directly with the policy committee and its staff. Any questions there on the first page? Okay, Rahima, if you'll scroll to the second page. What we have here, again, clarifies the process of an initial proposal, which the original 2410 envisioned coming from an outside source. And then when we go to the third paragraph, that's been struck out. Rules and regulations are subject to modification by board at any meeting. The initiative for change normally comes from the superintendent. This really isn't consistent with the concept of delegating, delegating that kind of authority to the superintendent isn't really consistent with our policy, nor with our multi-step process of adoption. We don't want modifications to be made at any meeting. We wanted to go through that multi-step process of vetting it for the for the community. Okay, if you scroll down, you'll see that the numbered paragraphs for second and third readings, this replaces the language that used to be there about discussion item, information item, and action item. This was, there's been a kind of a migration with different people coming into the district of using this first, second, and third reading orientation, and I don't mind it. I just assume, though, that our policy matches the language we use from day to day. Okay. If you want to scroll down to the third page, Rahima, policy dissemination underwent a pretty, whoops, is that the third page? I think you skipped the third page altogether, Rahima.
No, this is page 3.
Can you scroll up a bit? There's a lot more under the regulations and exhibits, I think.
Yep, here at the bottom of page 2. It starts and it carries over to the top of page 3.
All right, scroll up to number 3, board adoption process. Oh, I'm sorry. It's my fault. I'm the one that's off. Okay. So dissemination. The reason dissemination has changed so much is that has to do with the fact that we're using the internet to convey our policies in large measure. I think somebody had to retype that. There's actually not that much change. It's there's just a requirement that we ensure that the district policies are available to the public, that paper copies of the policy manual will be considered public record and need to be returned to the board office at the end of the day. Or, of course, anyone who wants to use the paper copy can photocopy it while they have their, have it in their hands. But they can do the same thing by downloading it from our board docs library. Any questions on policy dissemination? Okay, well, given that this is the first time folks are seeing it, I did have it finished some time back and shared it with Rahima, but we didn't think we were going to have enough time in tonight's meeting to cover it. So I just wanted to race through it and give you an overview and show you that that the work that was done was in accordance with the guidance I asked for last month. I'll ask you to read over the policy more carefully between now and next month. And I will ask next month if we can't move it out of committee and to the full board. Is that acceptable to everyone?
I would like to have the opportunity to review it through the normal process. And this is the first time that I'm seeing it. And so it's not acceptable for me, but that is up to the rest of the board members. I think we need more time to review it, look at what the changes are being proposed, and go through the actual process of having it discussed 3 times before it goes out of committee for a vote.
Oh, I'm sorry, you misunderstand the whole 3-step process. The 3-step process starts when a policy has left the policy committee and goes out into the public.
Okay.
So, and I'm not suggesting that we pass the policy next month at the board level. I'm suggesting that between now and next month, that the board read through this policy carefully. If there are no concerns, that we should be staged to move it out of committee, but then it would go through a 3-step process at the board or at the board meeting level to be vetted by the broader community. So I'm not even suggesting that we skip the 3-step process.
Okay.
Okay. If there are no other questions on this policy, we have completed our agenda and we are a little bit ahead of schedule. So we do have time to go into that executive session that folks were asking for at the end of the bargaining unit negotiations presentation.
Yeah, I'm going to see if that's really necessary to do at this meeting. Chris and Steve would like to prepare more of a thorough response to Commissioner LeBron's inquiry. So if there's no objections, we won't go into executive session tonight. Is there any objection to that?
You say will or won't?
We will not go into executive session. Is there any objections?
Well, I did have one question as it related to parental involvement in the negotiation process.
Okay.
And I guess I could ask it in open session if that's okay with you. I was saving it for executive session because I didn't want to violate any of the negotiation rules.
If it doesn't pertain to a specific contract, you can ask it in open session. That's fine. We may not have an answer for you. We may get back to you when we get back to Commissioner LeBron, but we can hear it certainly if that's what you want.
Oh, sure. And it related to the parental involvement in the whole negotiation process. And my thoughts were that if there could be maybe not even one parent, but different parents from PLAC, and have a pre-meeting so those parents can really state to both the negotiating team from the union and the administration what their concerns are and what actions they would like to see prior to the meeting. They could talk about school day, instruction, teacher qualifications, to really put everyone on notice as to what their expectations are. And that'd be a pre-meeting prior to you going into the negotiations. That wouldn't violate any New York State laws or anything, would it?
No. Gathering input is always fine, and I don't think we could necessarily compel the union to come listen, but we could invite them to come listen. Mm-hmm.
I think it would be in their best interest too if the parents are there.
To that point, Commissioner Clark, I think that our current parent involvement policy does have something in there about, as Steve said, we can't compel the unions to participate, but we can ensure that our negotiating team has an understanding of what the parent community is concerned about when it comes to contracts. I'm a little distracted because I'm trying very quickly to run through and find where our parent engagement policy is. It's policy 1900, and it's not a short policy, so I might not be able to find chapter and verse for you.
But I just think it would be a powerful statement to both the union negotiators and our negotiators to kind of set a baseline of what expectations are from the parent community.
Right.
And I understand you can't compel, but if, I would think that would be something that both groups would want to hear. And I think that would be a powerful kickoff to the negotiations themselves.
Okay, so is there any other, I don't see an agenda, Talia, is that?
Commissioner Elliott, I raised my hand
Oh.
because I was trying to just interject very quickly.
Go ahead, sorry
to-
about that.
No, it's okay. I just want to, say I do support allowing Steve and Dr. Miller some time to come together with information in writing, because I want to see it in writing. I want to put that out there, remind folks again. And then in thinking about this too, I just want to put this out there to you now too, Steve, so that you can ponder on this. Part of when the negotiations are happening is that, the union has surveyed its members as well to ask from their perspective things that they want to see. And I figure we can figure out a way to do that with both our parents and our community. And I want to be inclusive to the community too, because we have lots of community partners that support our families as well. So I just want to put it out there, figuring out different ways, but certainly I would like to see the information in writing. So I do thank you both for taking the time to make sure that you have that information and those answers back and something I can see. Thank you.
Commissioner Clark, I did find it in the policy. Policy 1900, there's a paragraph, parent interests in collective bargaining agreements. The Board of Education shall consider the concerns and interests of parents in its deliberation regarding collective bargaining agreements. The district will seek information regarding the needs and interests of parents in advance of collective bargaining negotiations. So the guidance is there. Whether we do it on a regular basis is another matter, but it is codified in our parent involvement policy. Okay?
Thank you.
All
Thank you,
right.
Commissioner Powell, Commissioner Clark. Is there anything else on the agenda that we need to address, Kalia?
No, that is it for agenda tonight.
Well, thank you, everybody. A great conversation. I'm going to entertain a motion to.
Well, apart from the board poll. We
Oh,
can...
shoot. Okay.
15 minutes early.
And hey, you all remember that I'm chair.
Okay, great job.
I want
You
to
know what to
recognize
do.
and uplift Vice President Elliott and her timeliness.
Listen, you know what to do.
At mine, and we gained ground on my watch.
Yeah, you did. That's true. That's true. I can just see the press now, Commissioner. Vice President Elliott is making people vote yes for her. Yeah, so everybody, number 10, yes.
Okay.
You have all your responses, Kalia?
No, not yet.
Okay. Oh, you all pondering about number 10? Oh, no pondering.
Isn't that us allowed to be heard? You might have answered the question.
Got everybody?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.
Well, good night.
Sure.